And good afternoon. Hi. Welcome to the 9th session in the Fall 2020 Sunoikisis Digital Classics program. This session is on the subject of visualization, data and text visualization. And we should note that this is the last session of this semester. So at the end of this, we'll wish you Merry Christmas and see you again next year. This is the last session of the Digital Classics semester of 2020. There will be a Digital Culture Heritage semester running from January to March in 2021, and then another Digital Classics and Digital Philology session running later, I think from April to July, usually, something like that. So we'll more about that will be posted presently. If you're watching this session live, please use the live chat feature on YouTube to both say hi, but also to make comments, ask questions of any of the speakers, and possibly join in the discussion. For the last few minutes, we'll be discussing a few example visualizations, and we'd be happy to hear your reactions as well. If you're not watching this live, welcome to the video. Please feel free to use this video in any way in teaching and learning, etc. And we're delighted that these sessions have a significant afterlife beyond their direct use in teaching that we do as we're part of the Sunoikisis Digital Classics community. So today's session is presented primarily by Aurélien Berra from the University of Paris Nanterre, and Naomi Wells, who's my colleague at the School of Advanced Study in the University of London. We're also joined by the co-organizers of this semester, Irene Vagianakis, Monica Berti, and Polina Jordanova, who you can also see there on the lower half of the screen. And all of us will be taking part in the discussion in the second half. So I think Aurélien is going to start with an introduction to the Voyant tools for text visualization. Naomi is then going to give us some introduction to broader concepts around visualization, including text and data visualization, and how these are used in research and some of the issues around that. And that will lead into our sort of roundtable discussion towards the end. And as I say, at any point, we're very happy to have questions, comments from both any of the other people in the call, but also from the audience on YouTube, if you like. So I'll hand over first, I think, to Aurélien.
Right. Hello, everyone. I thought, Gabby, that you wanted to explain how this session was dovetailing nicely with the computational linguistics and data and tree bank analysis sessions we had before, but that's about it. That's what we had to say. And this is, in many ways, a practical session, but we also want to convey a few principles and a few ideas. And if I had to sum up what will be exemplified by the Voyant analysis tool example, it's that tools embed theories and visualizations are interpretations. And just to unpack these two sentences, we would need a lot of time, but I think that you will understand better what I mean after this 20-minute presentation of Voyant tools. Obviously, we need to say something, a kind of caveat, is that writing your own code, typically in R or Python, and with different libraries and methods that you saw earlier in the sessions, will always be a more flexible solution than using built-in tools in a platform. When you want to explore your data and customize your results, especially, there is a steeper learning curve when you do that. You usually need more time, but you prepare, you analyze and visualize your data in the same environment. Whereas with tools like Voyant tools, you just throw the data at it and try to explore them and see what they tell you. I have to say that it's not that simple. It's not black and white. Voyant tools is going to be quite flexible as well. And when you do code, you actually use available libraries and templates and use tools built by other people through packages enabling you to manipulate the libraries, etc. So in the end, practically no one ever starts from scratch. And in conclusion, I will tell you when I think you kind of outgrow Voyant tools. But that being said, there are shared principles, good habits. Some treatises and manuals are actually tool agnostic, like the famous books by Tufte or the more recent Wilke example that you have in your bibliographical references. And I must say that well-designed tools can go a long way. The most important, whatever the tool you use, is to look critically at your data and your visualizations especially. This is why one of the suggested readings was the famous article by Jonah Drucker. Visualization can be anything from text on a page, figures in a table, and beautiful charts and colored visualizations. But it's always about using the graphic dimension of writing to actually read a corpus. So these are all different views, whether in text, table, or graphs, or images, even more complex visualizations. These are all views, transformations of the data, which we make ours to try and see something interesting in them. So the goal of the session is that you build confidence by trying out Voyant tools, for example, and the other tool that Naomi will be talking about, and so that you're confident enough to, as I said, throw your text at Voyant tools or another tool and think differently about your corpora. So it's mostly about changing perspective. Basically, I would say that if you're able to explain why such tools are unfit or don't seem powerful enough for the task at hand, then it probably means that you can go beyond ready-made solutions, or that you haven't looked deep enough into the options that are offered, for example, by Voyant. So for the exercise, if you don't have a preferred corpus, we suggested Homer and Sallust text from Perseus. So you will find that on the wiki page. And now, Gabby, if you could share my screen. Yes, we will switch to Voyant, really. This is the Voyant Tools homepage. This is the one on which you make you select your corpus, or you input your corpus, actually. Since you can do both of these, we'll go into further detail later. And you have this big blue magic reveal button, which is sort of a joke, but at the same time tells a lot about the spirit in which the designer and programmers of Voyant wanted you to approach the text. You input something, you import the data, quickly the Voyant makes all subsequent operations possible by creating lists and statistics once and for all, and then you reach the main interface of what they term a web-based reading and analysis environment for digital text. So if I give you an overview of what Voyant is in a few sentences, it's one of the characteristic features is that it's fully open source, and it's based on 20 years of tool building, research, and teaching in Canada by Stéphane Sinclair, who unfortunately was a professor of literature, who first worked on the French Oulipo experimental literary movement, and it tells you a lot about why he built it this way, and Geoffrey Rockwell, professor of philosophy and digital humanities as well. So I have to say that Stéphane Sinclair passed away last summer, much too young, and he was an incredibly kind and competent scholar, always interacting with the users and of Voyant and colleagues reaching out. His colleagues at Ado and in Montreal, where he was working, are currently trying to ensure that Voyant Tools is maintained, because we all know how useful this platform is, and it should not disappear or break in the near future. There is a small team, although Stefan was by far the most active. So we need to pay an homage to Stefan, but at the same time, we can hope that the tool is going to remain and be developed further. But part of the beauty of Volume Tools was that it was in constant development with improvements to the existing tools and new widgets. You will see that the little tools within the interface are called widgets. And one of the most exciting perspectives was, and still is, the integration of the notebook paradigm, where you can weave together the code, its visual output, and the scholarly text in a literate programming practice. And also in the works, there were, and there are, cartography tools and named entities recognition tools, so it can go further still. And also, I must mention that Volume Tools has a broader intellectual project, the one mentioned and presented in the book, which explores what it means to build research tools for data analysis and also includes case studies. That's the book Hermeneutica. You have the reference on the wiki as well by Jeffrey Rockwell and Stefan Sinclair. They, in this book, say that Volume Tools is about how analytical tools are, and I quote, instantiations of interpretive methods that can be woven closely into other hermeneutical things like text. So it's a dynamic process. They didn't want to do or build the one tool which makes it all, nor a specialized tool in a pipeline of tools, but rather a solid, flexible, and especially friendly and even playful platform, improving the digital literacy of humanists. And probably in this respect, it is a success. So let's come back to the homepage with a little characteristic owl of Voyant. When you want to load a corpus, you can do it by just entering a URL of an open online resource, or input text, plain text, or give it a file. It can be plain text or one of many other formats, including PDF. You also have, if you click open, built-in demo corpora, so Jane Austen and Shakespeare. And I have to tell you right away, although we won't use that, you have that in the exercise. You could also load several files as a zip archive, and these files will be the parts of one document, which is often interesting because since you don't touch, you don't change the corpus once it has been loaded, at the start you have to think exactly and know what you want to give Volume Tools in the beginning. It's often interesting because it can be the plays of an author, so the whole corpus will be broken down into plays, or treatises by an author, or periods in a set of documentary text, or really any relevant division of a corpus that you may want to examine. And if you copy a URL, so I will do that by using here all the definitions of digital humanities that were given at some point for the Day of DH blog event, you see that you reach that main interface I talked about, the main view, in which you have so 5 main widgets. Each pane here is going to be one different widget, and you can switch between them. So you can see that, for example, in this list of definitions, if you just look at the main terms through the usual word cloud, which is very characteristic of Voyant as well, when people know only one thing, it's going to be these type of word clouds views. You see that you don't have, for example, the article the, because English has been detected, and you have a list of stop words that has been applied. You could remove it, but this is not going to be automatic for Greek or Latin or other languages. But you do have built-in lists, and you can use your own lists. So you arrive here at the default view when you enter Voyant. You have that skin, that dashboard, which is the global way to explore your corpus, and default tools, these widgets in their different panes. And the preparation of the corpus, as I said, has already been done. So what happened is that your corpus has been tokenized, broken into words, in this case, and some statistics have been generated during the import. And then they are available for visualizations and dynamic exploration already. So you can see here in this summary pane here, the widget gives you some descriptive statistics about your corpus, like total words, unique word forms, etc. Last thing about the corpus, loading your corpora. It's pretty stable. Voyant tools at that address, voyanttools.org, on the Canadian server usually works well. But for privacy reasons, or because you want it to be faster, or for some other reasons, you can also use a server version, which is available on GitHub. Everything is open, just like the Voyant code. And if you do that, you can open a Java application here in your browser, which is exactly the same. It's going to be the same way to work with it, the same appearance, and the same results. So you will get exactly what I'm showing you now. The few widgets I would like to go through with you, I think they are essential widgets. Apart from the summary here I already talked about, is the word cloud, which is called here Cirrus. So you can see a word cloud. You can modify the parameters, and the only parameter you have in this pane is the number of terms that are being displayed. So depending on what you need, you can do that. It's quite small on my screen, and I will straight away show you that you can also export a view as a URL, and hence to a new window or new tab in which you only have that widget, which is pretty handy. So you have parameters, very simple number of terms displayed in this case, but also on every pane, when you hover here in that zone, you can find also the options for the tool. In this widget, you can choose a list of stop words. So English has been auto-detected. That's why you don't have, for example, the article, but you could just switch to none. You could choose the font and the color palette, but we're not going to do that too much. And you can see that the and have become, as usual, the most common words, the most frequent words, if you do that. A word cloud and all of the other widgets actually are using the basic list of frequencies, the frequency table that you see under the terms widget. So that's pretty common. That's the basis of any linguistic treatment. And it goes with a search box here, which by default tells you which are the most common words, but you could choose to look for anything else like digital. And you have options, obviously, to show that part of a word, etc. You have a whole syntax that is being described if you hover here and find the help behind the interrogation mark. So you also have in these columns some drop-down menus. So the apparent first impression can be deceiving. It's a bit more complex in the sense that you can also switch to relative and not absolute counts, and you have comparison tools if you want several text or documents to be compared, etc. And you can sort, obviously, as you wish. This is pretty basic, but this, to do just the same with code, would actually be quite time consuming. You also have a plus button, which is more recent, which integrates into this little widget something more elaborate, like an overview of the distribution of the term along the corpus time, that is, along the corpus from the first to the last word that has been detected when the corpus was imported. And you see that this is quite refined. This is what they call a spark line. The term was coined by Tufte, to show you how it reaches a maximum number of hits here, a minimum, and the final one here, as relative, in this case, frequencies. So these for the terms: overview, collocations, n-grams, etc., and different phrases. The terms are actually behind all the other tools, like the trends, which is also a very commonly shown feature of volume tools, which gives you an overview along different segments, in this case, arbitrarily defined equal segments of the text, 10 of them, and the frequencies of different terms. You can check a term and see how it behaves as compared to the other ones. And all these can obviously be defined by clicking here. And as you see, when I interact with one widget, some of the others are actually reacting. So you can see the distribution in this reader widget, which the name is self-explanatory. It's just the full text if you want to read it, but also with the trends here. So I'm adding and removing terms in both widgets at the same time. So trends also works along the corpus time, as I've said, and you can switch between different, with this display button, different types of visualizations. The most common and probably most efficient ones with the type of analysis that you do on text. So this shows you that within one widget, you can actually have different types of visualizations. Common ones. I said that you had the phrases as well here, which is a way to show you how many times phrases appear and how many words they contain. But also, so these are the n-grams, the famous phrases of 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Elements. But you could also have in this context widget, so with this definition, I should always open a new window if I want you to see something actually. So you can see here that what you have is a concordance, a very basic, traditional keyword in context, quick concordance, which makes it possible to see the left and right context of any term. And you could just go through it and, as before, have an overview of the way, the place it appears within the corpus. So that was the concordance, and two more examples. And I think we're going to something more, more elaborate, simply. But to do that, I will show you that you can go back to the home screen. And if I do that, I'm going just to leave my corpus, and I won't be able to access it anymore, because each time I load a text, it starts again all these statistical operations, and I have lost my corpus, unless I just copy the URL, which, if I show you this, looks like this, the server, and in the URI, corpus equals and a unique identifier, which makes it possible to access the corpus again, which is pretty useful. So if I start over, and this time to finish the demonstration part, upload one of the text we suggested. I will take the Odyssey. It's counting, crunching the numbers, etc. And now you see that I don't have default stop words applied. I will do it so that it looks cleaner. Okay, it means something now. We're not surprised to see that Ulysses' name is one of the most frequent words. I can go to, for example, the Scatterplot tool. So when I go to this icon in the options, I can choose to replace within that pane the widget, the current widget, with another one. So if I go to Scatterplot, it's showing me something that's almost impossible to view with this display, but will be more interesting here. And it's a traditional scatterplot of the most common terms as they appear. And you see the dimensions here are explained. So you have a lot of explanations here already. But if you want to see more, you have the documentation of foreign tools, which is quite extensive and pretty useful. And it will always tell you what you see and the tools are based on. Because Voyant is made to make you think about your work and your text, so it's always transparent, be it for the data or for the visualization and analysis principles. So you have dimensions here, and if you know how to read such a graph, it's a pretty common way to analyze a corpus. I will just say one thing, is that, as you see, this is a much more complex widget, because the options you have, or the parameters, are not just the number of terms that you want to be displayed, but also different ways of clustering and choosing the dimensions which are used and show row or relative, but also inverse document frequencies, the TF, IDF values. So to access the more relevant text by document, if you have a corpus that has been imported with a division, as I said, through a zip file. So you can do more elaborate things. And even if I had to say which categories you can use, these categories are non-exclusive. They tell you that they show you that you have essential tools for corpus linguistics, like counts, concordance, or co-occurrences, as I said, but also something that could be considered a more, trendy digital humanities tools, like topic modeling. It's a very basic but already quite interesting topic modeling widget, which was integrated in recent years. And you have bags of words that an algorithm creates to see which word contextually can be considered as a topic. So it makes it possible to see emerging themes within your corpus. And you also see where they occur in the corpus. So this topic, which I would have to read and actually try to make sense of, has a peak around the 2/3 of the Odyssey, for example. So I could just, if I'm curious, I think it could be interesting, try to see why. The principle for all these are given in the documentation, as I said. All widgets can be replaced by other widgets and opened in separate windows. But you also have more, and that's the last one I'm demonstrating, more artistic or let's say thought-provoking but more experimental visualizations, like the textual arc widget. So this doesn't make sense if you just keep it here. I need a new window. Okay, what is it doing, for example, here? It's going from the most common word to the least common word, tracing a path from one word to the next. And you can access the network, so to say, of each word here, but also it's visually impressive, a bit confusing. You can decide on the speed of the path, and you see also the context in which words actually appear. And you can see here that it's inspired by the work of an artist, actually. So this is an example of a few widgets that are more digital performance that can be, potentially are thought-provoking. This is not what you're going to see usually in textual analysis tools, but I think it's relevant when you see that Voyant Tools is here to open new views into your data. And of course, to conclude, anything that you see here can be exported. So we saw that it could be exported as a new view in a window, but also it can be exported as text or lists when this is relevant, or as an image, in the case of word clouds, for example, a PNG or SVG. And if it's about text, like this table of the terms, then you can export the data as list of plain text or in TSV or as JSON. But also, and that's the last possibility that I think is very relevant when you try to see why they made it so, Voyant Tools gives you the ability to export an HTML snippet that will be using an iframe tag to query Voyant Tools API, so that you actually have an autonomous capsule which you can embed on any website. So if you want your dynamically generated word cloud or word list or anything, any widget on your website, in, for example, a blog post in which you're explaining what you actually did with your corpus, this is possible. And to conclude on this, I would say that I said it's not supposed to be the one tool that makes it all, but it's not even supposed to be the one interface, in the sense that it's clearly very useful sometimes. I just stop this. To have several interfaces, several main views opened, because as I said, you're loading one form of the corpus. So if you have one lemmatized and one non-lemmatized, one original version of a text and one text of the translation in another language, it can be useful just to play with these different versions in different browser windows. And sometimes to compare corpora or do different things with the same corpus, it can be useful. So the strengths and limitations of Voyant Tools. Well, you will find them for yourself with the exercise, but I have to say that it's supposed to be very user-friendly, and I think it is. It's very easy to use Voyant Tools. It's very interesting that the tools are connected, which you're not going to get if you go your own path with your programming abilities. It is mostly about lexical analysis, but it's not aiming at using explicit encoded structures. So you can give it XML text, for example, but it will just strip the tags, and it will not be able to use, or not easily, the annotations that you have recorded in your XML, for example. And the corpus preparation happens before you do anything in Voyant. So lematizations or deeper encoding have to happen elsewhere, and they cannot be readily used. That's just not the point. With that, I probably hand over to you, Gabby, and to Naomi. And of course, we can go on discussing Voyant in the questions session. And also on the forum with the exercises, as you said. Gabby, you sent the link.
Yes. Thank you, Aurélien. I think we'll hand over directly to Naomi. Bear in mind again, if you're watching this live, please feel free to leave questions and comments in the live chat, and we'll pick them up at the end.
Sorry, can you see my slide? Oh, sorry, just get that up.
Not yet.
Is that visible? Great.
Yes. Yes, we can.
So I'm Mary Wells, and I'm a lecturer in Italian and Spanish with Digital Humanities. I will apologise, I'm not a classicist, I'm quite a contemporary researcher. But what I'm going to try to do here is give a kind of introduction and overview of data visualization from the perspective of the digital humanities. So firstly, when it comes to engaging with digital visualization as humanities researchers, I mean, the first question we have to ask ourselves is why? So why is it valuable to incorporate into our research processes and into our outcomes of research? Often people distinguish between visualization as part of the research process or as a product of the research process. Actually, the reality is these two will often overlap. But just to begin with maybe why we might incorporate it into the process of analysis, I think we've already seen that with the example of Voyant, why it might be useful to use data visualization as part of our analysis. But as we've seen, it provides a possibility to work with and view your data in new ways that can reveal things that might not be possible in other formats. I mean, the most obvious example is the ability to identify patterns and trends in a very large data set or corpus, which can be hard to identify without what might be described as a more distant or kind of comprehensive view that visualization can offer us. And so this is the distant idea. Often it's associated with distant reading approaches. I'm not sure if this has maybe been discussed in previous sessions. Distant reading is a term that some people don't use anymore, and some people critique. But I think what's really important with visualization is to see it as part of a wider toolkit of research methods that can be used alongside more qualitative and close reading approaches. So it's not either or, they can be complementary processes. So for example, you might use visualization as an initial research stage to help identify patterns or parts of your research data, which you then want to subject to maybe more fine-grained or closer analysis. And I'll mention some tools at the end, but you've seen this maybe already with Voyant, but Tableau in particular is a very useful tool for using visualizations to identify and isolate parts of your data set, particularly when you're working with very large data sets. And then it allows you then to maybe export parts of your data into new files that you can work with more closely. And they can also help you in the process of kind of removing maybe irrelevant data. But the key to using visualization as part of the research process is to engage with it critically. So, for example, you may produce an initial visualization as part of your analysis, but with the knowledge that this visualization may be obscuring errors or uncertainties in your data set that you need to look at more closely. And engaging critically with data visualization is particularly important when we think of it as a tool for communicating our research. Now, data visualization has the potential to be an extremely effective tool for communicating information and research findings. And this is evidenced by the fact that we are now surrounded by data visualizations. And this is particularly at the moment during this pandemic, we're seeing visualizations everywhere. And it's easy to understand why. Visualizations have a very powerful rhetorical force, and they have in particular the potential to communicate very large and complex data sets in a much more easily and quickly understood form. But it's actually because they can be so powerful that we need to be really careful and critical in how we use and how we engage with them. I'll go into more detail from a humanities perspective of how we might engage critically with visualization. But there's an interesting recent Guardian article, which I've just linked to here. And this is where some data journalists who created US election visualizations actually talked about and reflected on their choices. And I thought it was interesting because you don't normally see these kind of reflections in journalistic kind of visualizations. And so what they say is data-driven visuals are everywhere and they can cause a strong emotional reaction in readers. But it's also more important than ever to consider whether your data set may not be telling the whole story, or your graphic could be misleading the reader in some way. And this really gets to the heart of some of the issues with visualization, which I'll go on to kind of discuss in a bit more depth from a maybe more of a humanities perspective. But just to kind of start with some basics of the question of what can we visualize. So perhaps most common in terms of visualizations is more quantitative and particularly statistical data. And perhaps one of the most obvious ways of visualizing things is to visualize the relationship between two variables. Text, obviously we can visualize, and that's what we've just seen examples of with Buoyant. Other common visualizations in the digital humanities, particularly it's quite common to visualize networks or relationships. And these can be between people or, for example, between institutions or countries. There's temporal, there's geographic, spatial data. And there are, I think, some examples of these different types of visualizations in some of the reading on the page for this session, and you'll see some examples of how you might visualize these types of data. But really any form of research data has the potential to be visualized. I'll mention after, and you've already seen this, that specific visualization tools and platforms have requirements in terms of what type of data they can be used with, and also in particular how the data might need to be structured for these specific tools. But generally anything can, in theory, be visualized. But what it is important to think about before we go on to actually doing visualization, creating visualizations, is to think about what we mean by data. And this is particularly important in the humanities because data is a much less taken for granted term than maybe in other more scientific disciplines. In digital humanities, people are perhaps more comfortable using the term data. But elsewhere in the humanities, scholars are often quite reluctant to use the term data when they talk about their primary research sources, and they can be quite uncomfortable with the term data. And really this is because data is a term associated with the idea of factual or even objective information. And for those of you who've read the Drucker article, she explains very clearly why humanities researchers really need to engage very critically, not just with visualization, but going right back to what we understand by data itself. So in particular, Drucker suggests data should be reconceptualized as capta, which is taken actively while data is assumed to be a given, able to be recorded and observed. From this distinction, a world of differences arises. Humanistic inquiry acknowledges the situated, partial, and constitutive character of knowledge production. The recognition that knowledge is constructed, taken, not simply given as a natural representation of pre-existing fact. So those of you who've read the article will see how Drucker uses different examples to illustrate how you visualize capture rather than data. But the key argument here is that reconceptualizing data as capture means acknowledging the risk of producing simplistic visualizations that obscure or erase interpretative complexity and ambiguity. This might be something we can maybe discuss in a bit more detail after. But just to turn also briefly to the how of visualization. As I mentioned, in order to visualize our research data using kind of widely used visualization tools, the data needs to be structured and structured in specific ways for different tools or platforms. And this can actually be one of the most challenging parts of the visualization process, particularly when we're dealing with complex or kind of messy data sets. And you can have quite a long process of what's often described as cleaning your data. And it's important to remember that when you are cleaning or structuring your data, this also means making initial interpretative choices. And so again, it needs to be undertaken with care and reflexivity to avoid the pitfall identified by Drucker of kind of erasing ambiguity in this process of structuring or cleaning your data. In terms of working out how your data needs to be structured, I would recommend I can't go into details of all the tools, and really it's the best thing you can do is to experiment with the different tools. But just to mention a few of these, as mentioned, there is an exercise for working with raw graphs or Tableau, or both, if you would like to. These are kind of very general visualization tools, not specifically, Tableau in particular is not really specifically a digital humanities tool. It's used very widely for making visualizations with CSV files. As we've heard, Voyant is particularly used for visualizing text. Gephi is one of the most common tools used for visualizing relationships and networks. Palladio is a specifically digital humanities tool used often for historical data and geographical data. I think again there are some tutorials on the page for this session which give you a bit more information about how to use these tools. And each of these tools obviously has different possibilities and is often, you need to kind of use the right tool for your data set. But just kind of looking at kind of maybe the choices you make when you use these tools and when you create visualizations, you can create static or more interactive visualizations. And interactive visualizations can be useful because they can allow you to incorporate more information into your visualization. So things where people can work a bit more with your data that you're presenting. And kind of related to this is choices about the simplicity or the complexity of your visualizations. Now, I would suggest we shouldn't see these as kind of one is better than the other. You know, a simple visualization is what we're aiming at. Visualization is often valued as a tool for being able to kind of very simply and clearly communicate a message. But as mentioned, there is this strong risk of erasing complexity and ambiguity. And I would just say here, it's not an either or situation, but it's really important to think about the context in which you are using or presenting a visualization. So if it's a visualization that's going to appear on your PowerPoint slide for 2 seconds, a complex visualization may not be very appropriate if you want your audience to be able to process and understand what you're presenting. However, if it's a visualization which people have time to explore and interact with, or if you're using it as part of your own kind of research process, then complexity is not necessarily a disadvantage. And this is also true if you're working with a visualization that's potentially quite misleading. That's not an issue if it's part of your research process and you're very familiar with your data set or your corpus. And so you're conscious maybe of some of the flaws or the complexities that that visualization is obscuring. But it's very different if you're presenting that to an audience who aren't familiar with the data or the corpus behind the visualization. And so in that case, maybe you need additional text, maybe you need multiple visualizations that when combined are able to reveal a more complex narrative. But whatever choices you make, it's really important, as I said, just to be conscious, to be reflexive about the representational choices you make in terms of visualization. And there's, again, I think it's in the list of references. Rupika Rassam has done a very interesting analysis of visualizations of migrant journeys. And she argues in particular we should approach visualizations as narratives constructed through both the explicit and tacit decisions undergirding their construction. These range from the selection of data sets to the use of multiple modes of communication, such as textual, visual, and spatial, that influence users' experiences of discovery. So just a final point here on the multimodal nature of data visualizations. This is, I think, important if you are someone who is mainly used to working with and analyzing text. I think it's really important that in order to bring similar levels of criticality and analytical depth that you normally apply to text, and to bring these to more visual aspects, it can be really useful to read about and incorporate analytical approaches from other research areas that maybe pay more attention to subjects like the grammar of graphics or visual design or multimodal forms of communication. And again, I think there's some references on the page that give you some examples of how you might develop these kind of different types of analytical understanding for these more visual forms of communication. So I will end here, and I think what we're going to do now is move on, I think, to look at some examples. And I think there's a kind of question here about the kind of how we represent complexity and ambiguity that we can maybe also explore in discussion, but I will hand it back over to Gabby and yeah, to get us started.
I turned my microphone on, sorry. So we'll spend the next 5 or 10 minutes looking at half a dozen examples of visualizations. We may not get through all of them, but we'll look at least 2 or 3 of these. This is primarily for the rest of the panel, the people in the call to discuss and to have thoughts about. Some of them you may not have seen yet, so it's spontaneous. But obviously anyone watching this live, bearing in mind that you're watching with a 10 or 15 second lag, so if you leave comments, I apologize if by the time we see your comment we've moved on to the next visualization, but please do feel free to join in. So shall we start with a pre-digital visualization? One suggested by Aurélien. Does everyone know what this is? Or maybe Aurélien, do you want to explain what this is just quickly?
Oh, it's one of the most celebrated hand-drawn visualization. It's about the Russia campaign of the Napoleonic army, and so it is celebrated because it's in Edward Tufte's books as well. But it tells you a story. Really, it's complex because you have below on the at the bottom you have the temperature. Which tells you that there is a correlation between the temperature in Russia in winter and the fact that, and that's the main visualization, the fact that the army was from left to right and back from right to left, very numerous, they're not so numerous, and then most people had actually died, and they branched at some point and went back, defeated, having reached Moscow and having had to come back and leave Russia. So it tells you about several things, but it tells you a narrative about what happened then with numbers, how many soldiers, with the narrative time, so to say, because it's about moving from left to right and right back to left, and also it's explanatory because it tells you about temperature. And this is all explained actually in this nice handwriting over there. So that's the Minard, Inspecteur Général des Ponts et Chaussées en retraite, which is an extremely quaint way of designating someone. So it's a 19th century visualization that is quite striking because it's efficient, mostly.
So the question then is for the rest of us is how well does this communicate the facts, the data, or capta if we prefer, and how does it communicate the interpretation, the narrative that that the author is putting on this data with this visualization? And are there any elements of this that we can particularly praise or particularly criticize as features to look out for in visualizations? Anyone? So there's a couple of things that are not clear to me, possibly because I don't know the history in enough detail, but what's happening here? Did they somehow meet their past selves at some what exactly happened? I can't quite see how that.
I suppose that they branched out on the way to a part of the army stayed there and was rejoined by the ones coming back in black. I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But it
must be the other way around, mustn't it? Because it must be that part of the army branched off and stayed there, and then as they returned, the branch that there came and rejoined the rest.
That's what I meant.
That then gets bigger, and they fled together. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, yeah. I mean, even just from looking at it, we've reconstructed a part of the history that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could look at it more closely, I could tell where it was they stayed.
But then one thing I didn't say is that, because it's obvious, it's about geography. So it's a spatial representation. And just by naming the cities and drawing the outlines of the rivers, we know what this is about. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because usually when you imagine cartography now, you think of Google Maps and you have a very complex background on which you have some relevant data. And here it's very pure in the sense that you only have some points and geographical features that make it relevant, but it's not about representing Russia. You don't need that.
Yeah. What's interesting, I guess, is although we think of this as being a timeline, it's a chronological narrative in some ways. They started out and then they got to Russia and then they came back. There's no time axis on this visualization because that's not what it represents. There's the spatial axis, there's the temperature axis, and there's the how many people were still alive axis, which is represented by the thickness of the line. But there isn't a time axis per se. There are dates.
There are dates. That's it.
But not on a separate axis visualized otherwise. So, yeah. Cool. Good. Shall we move on to one of the others? Shall I just quickly show one that should be very easy to comment on and critique? So what's going on in this visualization? The average height of women from Latvia is approximately 5 times that of the average height of women from India. You might interpret from that graph. It's I mean, it's trivial and cheap. I mean, it's to criticize it because it's one that's been laughed at on social media, but it illustrates 2 classic problems with visualizations, things that you're taught to avoid at the very beginning. One is starting your y-axis somewhere other than 0. So this, this only measures a difference of 5 inches, which is 12.5 centimeters in real money. So it's it's a tiny distinction there. And the other is using a 2-dimensional an area to represent what is actually only 1-dimensional metric. So the woman from Latvia looks about 16 times the spatial area than the woman in India, whereas actually they're just saying she's 10 centimeters taller. So it's misleading, and it doesn't really help us to understand anything at all.
Don't forget the colors. They're just, stereotypes. They don't bring anything. They don't even connect Latvia to South Africa. Doesn't make sense at all.
In any useful way. No, I mean, the colors, I guess, just help you to differentiate between the adjacent things. It's like the colors on a map. They don't mean anything. It's just you have to be a different color from the neighboring one. Yeah.
Well, I guess because it's, there's quite an obvious flaw here, but it is interesting about the pink obviously is a representational choice as well.
Yes.
But what the effect of visualizing it in this way could be, and what for me it does is it exaggerates cultural difference. It kind of suggests this kind of vastly, it exaggerates the difference between Latvia and India. And so if we think of what actually quite damaging effect that could have is to very much exaggerate kind of cultural differences between contexts and kind of almost exoticizing kind of India. Latvia.
Yes, and it also mixes without any comment very ethnically diverse countries. So the average height of a person in Australia is nothing to do with ethnicity, because it's the most ethnically diverse country in the world, I think. So it is mixing all sorts of things which can have all sorts of repercussions in terms of interpretation, but also, as you say, stereotype and prejudice and so forth. So yes, it's not just a visualization to laugh at. It is slightly pernicious.
I think it's also on a meta level. It's also a symptom. They felt that if they just had a scatterplot with single value points, it was not attractive enough. It was not interesting. Hence the sizes, the shapes, which are completely obviously wrong. It doesn't make sense. It's redundant and stupid. And also the colors, because that now you can have colors everywhere. So why not make it? Well, don't.
Yeah. And for it to be a meaningful graph, you'd also want to show variability within each country, right, as well as average, because average doesn't mean anything if there's much more variability in Latvia than there is in Peru, for example, or vice versa.
Maybe what we were pointing to was that it should be a scatter plot just with dots or a bar diagram. And with what you added, Gabby, it could also be some kind of a visualization of several box plots with the means or the medians and the maximum minimum for each country, and that would make more sense.
Yeah. But yes, that would be less eye-catching, and
sure,
and it wouldn't show the difference as much as presumably they wanted to. It's also worth pointing out that the x-axis is completely arbitrary. It's just ordered by height. It's not. There's not. This doesn't show that the further south you go or the further east you go, any particular axis changes. It's just ordered by height. It doesn't make
Lastly, if I can play the devil's advocate, taking up the point raised by Naomi, it's quite simple. it's too busy as an image, but it's quite simple and it's quite memorable. So in the end, if you see that in a newspaper, on a website that you just, browsing, you may remember that women in Latvia are higher than women in India, which is in a way the point. It's not about subtle distinctions. So I'm not defending this because it looks very bad and wrong. But if it's not academic, you can see why they don't want it to be boring, and they try to convey a few points, and maybe just one here.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Should we look at one of your visualizations, Naomi? You had the Du Bois one. I think is another pre-digital one. Quite fun. Yep.
So yeah, I'll just give a bit of context. So it's from the Paris exhibition in, I think, 1900, and Du Bois was a sociologist, and he went with a team of black sociologists, and they created this series of visualizations, hand-drawn, obviously. So this is just one visualization from a series. The series was intended, slavery had been abolished at this point, but what it was intended to really show was the continuation of systems of oppression and institutionalized racism. And so this was at the Paris exhibition in 1900. So yeah, hopefully you can see. Is it helpful to zoom in a bit so you can read the text?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so this was obviously the information it's conveying is quite straightforward information, but it's a very interesting representational choice. I think. Did you want to comment, Gabriel?
No, I just wanted to explain for anyone who couldn't quite see it that the top three colours are representations of the proportion of African American population who are in very large cities, medium cities, small cities, to the largest group in red, those who are who still live in rural areas. Yeah.
Sorry.
But yes, the choice of color, the choice of shape. Does that make it easier to interpret or harder?
So yeah, I mean, obviously the visualizations have often been compared to kind of more artistic representations. And I think they leave interpretation quite open, which I think is interesting. I think what I like about the visualizations is they do leave interpretation to you as a viewer. And so I think there are lots of different ways of reading what the intention is here. I think obviously the spiral has a kind of it emphasizes. I guess if we compare it to the last one, we are seeing, something that is emphasizing the difference between where people live. I think some interpretations have suggested also whether, it's the lynching was obviously continuing in the US in this period, and is this image meant to recall the lynching of Black people, particularly in the countryside? So there's a lot of interesting, but I don't know if anyone else has got any comments on it.
I think it's a good example of vague, in the sense that it's not according to predefined ways of reading the image. A vague way of using emotions with colors and shapes. I mean, in a way, it's a kind of a riddle. You just wonder why this line is going this way and what it looks like. So it's not obvious like the previous one, which was completely stereotyped. This one, it makes you wonder about the meaning of the shape, because the 2 dimensions of the paper, the 2D, are not used in a standardized way. That's, I think, now we see it as interesting. I'm really wondering what it could mean for people seeing that at the time.
Because you can see that the red area is the largest, that the green at the top is the next, then the yellow, and then the I guess that's blue in there, the smallest. But by how much, I wouldn't like to guess. Is that 4 times as large as the green, or 6 times as large? That's
No, it would be called misleading now, obviously.
Well, but compared to representations that show how many cartons of eggs you can get in a double-decker bus, or how the ridiculous things they use to visualize things in newspapers just randomly. It's at least the amount of red ink on this page is presumably correctly proportional to the population that it represents.
And then it's a bit more artistic. I don't know about the intent really about that, but to me it looks a bit more like Paul Klee or Miro before the time, rather than what we're doing now in newspapers.
Yeah. Okay, shall we move on to the general discussion? We've had a couple of questions about Voyant tools from the YouTube audience, which we might throw up.
Sure.
Just quickly. I think you can answer these quite quickly, Aurélien. So there's a question from Anisa who asks, given that we have you can generate a URL which allows you to go back to or share your visualization, does that mean they're keeping our data on their server? And if so, do you know for how long?
Well, it's not something they actually document. The thing is that if you go back and use the corpus from time to time, like several times a month, they should not delete it. But it's not a contract, right? So Stefan used to tell me that it should work like for 3 months, but then 2 years later, I did find a corpus at some point. So if they change the infrastructure, if they move from one server to another, maybe they will delete the whole thing because it's not something they commit to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I didn't say that, but it may seem strange that you can't load a previous corpus. But if you use the server version, it's very easy to actually store your data and bring a corpus just like the Jane Austen or Shakespeare corpus. You can just have your files in your Voyant server folder. And B, it's actually an advice that is often given in data science work, that you should always start afresh with your data, because you don't want actual previous objects and previous data that may be inaccurate, not up to date, etc., to be loaded again. So it does make sense in a way, and it's more about exploring the corpus in short sessions, or in sessions, but at a given moment. So, and last thing,
you showed, it doesn't take long to load, right?
It never does. No, it's very quick. So if you have very large corpora, it can get a bit lengthier, but really I never had any trouble. Last thing, they don't document everything you can do with the URI or URL, but as you saw, you can you can identify the corpus and load it back, but you can also store your stopwords list with this mechanism. and many different things this way. And also, you could rename your corpus, name it Plato instead of E16, etc. And you can then call it back with the Plato keyword. So you do have ways of working with that.
Okay, cool. And another question to which I think the answer is lemmatization, but I'll let you decide that. So Federico asks about the noise introduced into the data by different cases of words, etc., and whether there's any way to group these, perhaps by using WordNet to cluster them.
Okay, so the answer is first, this is the design of volume tools, not a bug or a problem. It's because you need specialized tools, and if you want a tool like that to be able to deal with Latin, Chinese, and Tibetan, as well as ancient Greek, then you can't offer lemmatization, because we don't even have, proper tools for all these languages that everyone could use. So it would make it much more complicated. So the answer is pre-processing. If you want to deal with that and visualize, explore the data with Voyant, you use a pre-lemmatized text, which is what we give you for the exercise. And for this, I extracted the Perseus lemmatized text, I think. Okay. And lemmatization in ancient Greek and Latin is, in a way, still a new frontier. We are reaching satisfactory levels, but it's still something that's very, interesting in a pedagogical context, because I teach digital humanities courses at the AIM-AL level, and on the first year, they do text encoding, etc. But they also use a bit in the end of the semester. They use a bit Voyant, so they don't have to code. They just discover the text this way. And the first thing they do after a few hours and just one exercise is tell me, obviously, but we can't lemmatize the text, so it's pretty useless for inflected languages like Latin and Greek. And the answer is yes, it is. But if you have the data, you can still use it. So in the second semester, we have, I think, outgrown Volume tools, and we switch to R, and they learn how to do that programmatically, which is not that easy and takes a lot of time and has, as I said, a steeper learning curve. So, yeah.
But you could also say, take a text, which there is no lemmatized version of around, run it through a third-party lemmatization service, and just feed the lemmatized version directly into Voyant.
Exactly.
And you'd get the same sort of result. It wouldn't be as dynamic. You couldn't do it, pick another text and run it through, and it would automatically lemmatize it. But it would, and that would. So by lemmatizing, we mean turn all words into the dictionary head form of that word.
Yes.
Yeah.
But every lemmatizing tool that we have for ancient Greek and Latin can make blunders. Real blunders.
Sure. Nevertheless, the kind of words that it's likely to mess up on are going to be the less common words that are less problematic as noise. If Federico's issue is, you're getting 19 different words instead of the single word, aner, that's less likely to be an issue.
Sure.
And so it may introduce new noise, but it'll introduce a tiny fraction of the amount of noise that it's getting rid of.
And then again, it's not black and white. It's not that lemmatized text is always the best way to have a look at your text. It's just a way to see different things. Because for example, if you have a dialogue, there are so many things that you see through the verb and the actual verb forms, because in a way, your text is linguistically pre-analyzed because it is inflected, which is very interesting.
Yes. Anise made a similar point in response to that the inflection can be relevant information, particularly in stylistics. It's often discussed. It's better to leave a word unlemmatized because you get information from the inflection.
Just think about genre. people trying to do gender studies in the humanities, and then you give them a visualization tool with lemmatized versions of the text, and every ankila or serva has become a servus. You know, it's the word. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yes. Cool. So, so obviously we haven't given a detailed tutorial on how to use raw graphs or Tableau Public as Aurélien did for Voyant tools. We have on the session page, which you will find a link to in the text beneath this YouTube video. There are links to various other tutorials in those tools if you're interested in looking at those and experimenting with them. And as we said, there's a suggested exercise at the bottom of that page, which gives you both some text that you can try out in Voyant and some sample data that you can try out in Tableau and raw graphs. So please do try those out. There is also a forum that you can post to for help that for the next couple of weeks we can guarantee we'll keep an eye on it. In the following months we might accidentally notice something there, but no promises. But so please do play around with those, and yeah, get in touch if you do. We'd be delighted to hear from you. I guess that's all we've got time for. So thank you again to Naomi and Aurélien, and to also thanks to Irene and Paulina for co-organizing this entire semester, and to all of you for watching and joining in. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope both fun and valuable for you all as well. And do join us next semester for the Digital Cultural Heritage, which will be advertised in the same place you found out about this soon. Cool. Thank you very much. Bye.